Hi, everyone, and welcome to Association Amplified Live. You might know this show as Buzzworthy Live. We've updated the name to better reflect where we're going and who this show is for. We're starting the year with something that keeps coming up. Budgets feel stable but cautious, heavy reliance on events, and a growing sense that revenue diversification can't wait, but it still feels hard to act on. The association forum just put out their fire report. And one stat that really jumped out at us is 78% of CEOs say that their budgets are stable but cautious. And 62% cite that event dependency as their biggest vulnerability. That tension, knowing that you need to change but feeling stuck, is what we're going to be digging into today. I'm joined by Dan Stevens, founder and president of TaleWind Digital, and we're talking about why that hesitation exists, what adaptive business models look like in practice, and how associations can build digital content-led revenue without blowing up what's already working. Drop questions in the chat. We'll get to them towards the end of the show. And now let's get into it with Dan Stevens. Dan, welcome to the show.
Nice to be here.
Dan, so the fire report shows that 62% of leaders see event dependency as their biggest vulnerability, but very few have actually moved away from this. I know I get that in my conversations with executives at associations. So if leaders know what's at risk, why hasn't digital revenue been replaced yet?
Well, I think, first of all, events are historically not only the largest revenue maker for so many associations, but it puts them on the map, and because it's both an education opportunity and a networking opportunity, and very few associations have wanted to shift from that, although the margins are shrinking on events after the pandemic, and many of their budgets are quite dependent on it, but they haven't taken the same approach to grow other revenue streams. If you look at as they do with the events, where pretty much everyone in the association has their finger in the pie when they're preparing for the annual conference or a big event, and they really collaborate well, and the experience is phenomenal usually, the content is great, and as a byproduct of that, the revenue is wonderful. Take that same mindset to digital. How is the experience? How is the content and the quality and consistency of that content? And is there a revenue stream there to fund it like there is with events? And that's where, people come home from the event, they're tired, they go back into their silos, and those things don't happen because it does require that collaboration to think at that same level.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Like, part of me feels that the part of the answer is also the fact that associations have been doing the event play for quite a while, and it was a great growth driver in terms of attracting an audience and building revenue. But it still often feels kind of undeveloped in terms of how they approach digital, and therefore the departments and kind of that muscle memory isn't there. And what I often think about is that there are associations that are doing digital very well, right, and integrating content in both their member value proposition and being a source of revenue. But are those stories really being championed across our space, so people kind of understand that digital is as big of an opportunity or more as, say, as events?
Well, and it is more. Think of all the effort that goes into that annual conference, and the average attendance is 15% of your membership. So now think about what is the experience for the other 85% all year long. And so how do you, instead of thinking of it as an or, more like an and, I know associations where the content planning is done collectively for the year, of which the event is part of it as opposed to treated separately. So when the key speakers come off stage, they go down the hall and they're interviewed and filmed and recorded for the content calendar down the road. And so that's an opportunity, that every association has to leverage the fact that all of their members, all of their sponsors, and all of their speakers are in one place at the same time. It's a very economical place to grow your content calendar, because content will drive revenue. Just like it does at an event, it will do so for digital. But the other thing it does is it elevates the experience for the 85% who don't make it to the event, and reduces churn and or makes it easier, I should say, for retention and recruitment compared to without.
I often talk with association leaders that I feel like the having that kind of content development, either with their events or to add to their websites, it's often maybe a pipe dream to them, because they feel like it's something that's out of reach in terms of where they're really at with their revenue. And they just simply can't afford it, especially with the pressure that associations are under currently. So do you have any advice to associations where they can go from this, I wish we can do that, to let's do that? How does one actually be able to move forward and do this with this pressure that's under associations right now?
Well, and I don't think anyone has more pressure than the events manager. I mean, like, there's just so much happening in such a short period of time. And what tends to happen is when those conversations come up, who gets called upon? The events manager. They don't care beyond the day after the event. I mean, they just can't. And so you need some other champion. It could be marketing, it could be publishing, to look at that event through their lens and say, I'm not going to add work for you, but I'm going to leverage the fact that I've got all of this great potential at that conference, and I'm going to go and capture it without interfering with what the event experience is for the people that are there. And if you can do that, now you've got a leverage model to build out and create kind of an all year long value proposition, because your conference by nature is a member value. You have to think of your website and go, is it a member value? Does it have a strong experience? Does it have great content? And does it have a revenue stream, just like the events do and your magazine has, and your LMS, if you have one, has? Because if you don't, how are you going to invest in it? Whether that's hiring more people or outsourcing or some blend, all of your member values that stick and that work have a revenue model. And most websites for associations were not designed not only for good revenue growth, but they weren't designed for really effective digital publishing either. And so fixing those two things allows you to create the model of, what I would call a leverage model, where I'm taking advantage of the fact that certain things happen year after year. My events, maybe particular meetings that happen, when my boards get together. All of those are opportunities to collect content at a very affordable price and then repurpose it at the appropriate time. And if you're thinking in that mindset, and again, it's usually not the person putting on the event who has the time to think that way. It has to be somebody else who has an ownership of that annual content calendar to think that way and use those opportunities in a great way to create great content, which by nature will create engagement, which will create revenue.
Yeah, I think there's a real aha moment there that I want to repeat for folks in case it got missed. And it's simply that until you treat digital like another revenue stream, it'll always feel like a cost center that you can never afford.
So true. So true. And the opportunity is to say, look, this is not only a revenue from a sponsorship standpoint, an advertising standpoint, or a pay-per-view standpoint. It's going to improve my recruitment and retention numbers. That's a revenue opportunity in itself as well. And you have to look at it across all three R's and say, what's my value proposition in a world of AI where I can sit there and get all the knowledge in the world coming to me? what is my value proposition? Well, you've got trust, but you can't compete on quantity of content, but you can on quality. And so, how do I make that something that we do so that when there's 10 things to choose from, I trust the association, I go there to get my content.
Dan, the report talks about moving from events to ecosystems and calls it an adaptive business model, but that phrase can feel a bit abstract. What does that actually mean in practice for associations trying to make the shift?
Well, I think adaptive sounds a lot better than, this, like the words of digital transformation or something that sounds just so big and onerous.
Mhm.
And it's if you look at the value an association has, its core values, they rarely change. But we don't fax people anymore, right? We email them, or we communicate digitally or online, like you and I are right now. That's an example of staying true to the values, but adapting to the way people want to be engaged with. And so, how do we evolve our way of informing, educating, and inspiring, which is really the three big value propositions that associations have for their members, into a model to leverage all of the wonderful digital opportunities that are way more affordable and than they ever have been and will continue to be more affordable, and can elevate, because we were just talking about the Golden Globes the other day about how so much of it is animation these days. What Hollywood does and what social media does sets the bar on what people expect in content. And what do we come out with? SCORM courses and, like voiceover PowerPoint. Like that just doesn't cut it with today's people. And so we have to elevate the experience while we're informing, educating, and inspiring. Well, use some of these tools, adapt to the higher tools, and get revenue and partners to pay for it so that you can do it, not so much that it's the volume game, but keep the level of trust that you have, but meet the expectations of the way people want to engage with content today.
Yeah, I think that's really well said. At the same time, it's like not everything needs to be this giant Hollywood budget, high cost project that you put out there, like in the programming that you're developing. Like there's a real balance between scrappy content that's really delivering on value and appropriating funds for when an extra level of polish and professionalism is required. Associations find themselves in an interesting juxtaposition that honestly I don't feel gets talked about enough. And that's on one side, they're trying to advocate for their industry. So there's this level of governance and mission and polish and professionalism that they need to carry themselves, so they can, be taken serious in Washington or what have you. But at the same time, they're serving people, and people are value driven, and they're creatures of habits, and they live a personal life, affected by their consumer habits. So you being able to deliver value ultimately becomes a game in how well can you serve up a value proposition online. Like they occupy the mindset of a service provider as much as you are a nonprofit association, right? So if you were just occupying that mindset of being a service provider, say a for-profit, you'd want to make bluntly clear that I have something that you need, and you're going to make sure that that it's going to be really easy for people to consume, purchase, or consume what you're putting online, right? And there often I find that there's often a gap between the experience side and kind of prioritizing that. Um, and the weight of needing to run an organization that's respectfully and faithfully going to represent their industry.
Yeah. And you're well said. Your comments reminded me of another stat that was in the fire report that you mentioned, and that is that 60% of all workers need reskilling by 2027.
Mm.
60% in 1 year. think about the opportunity that creates for associations to think less transactionally, like we were talking about events, and thinking more holistically about putting together educational streams and frameworks and partner with whoever they need to partner with, other associations, sponsors that want to contribute. The other stat that was in there was 87% of partners and sponsors want to co-create. That's almost 9 out of 10. So you've got this
Mm-hmm.
huge need. You've got this group of people who are saying, "I'll help you. I will spend money with you to help co-create." Um, and at the same time, we have this shallow digital engagement because of the infrastructure and the investment and the fact that, as you mentioned earlier, it's been a cost center. Who wants to grow a cost center in a tough
Mm-hmm.
economy? And so
Mm-hmm.
that's where the mind shift and that adaptive business model needs to come in to say, hey, I need capacity. I'm going to reach out to these partners, these 87%, and I'm going to help use them in a coordinated way so that we never do anything to lose the trust that it's taken years for associations to build, but to do it in a modern way with a proper budget, whether I have to outsource it or hire, and use that money to do it well and to get at this 60% of the people who need to be reskilled in less than a year. You know, AI, you can't go, 10 minutes without someone talking about AI right now. But like, is your member looking at you, at your association as the source? Remember when COVID happened? Most associations grew because they rallied and they set up their websites and all of their communications say, I'm going to keep you up to date on what's going on with COVID. Are you doing that with AI? Or are they
Mm-hmm.
getting it from somewhere else? Someone else building? Are they putting their dollars and their time and their loyalty to somebody else? What a huge opportunity for you to put not only AI into a box of, forget just AI in general, but AI for our industry or our profession, and focus on bringing that noise down to something where people can go, you know what, I can trust my association. I'm going to learn about AI within the framework of my industry or my profession, and I'm going to and it's going to be supported because it's going to be not a one webinar. It's going to be a series that's going to happen throughout, a year or maybe even longer. So I have to renew, and it's going to make it so that I'm sticky. And yes, the physical event might have part of it, and a live panel like you and I are on right now might be part of it, and some offline, watching videos or attending podcasts might be part of it. And you can create a multimodal and multimedia experience that is really enjoyable and convenient for the member at the same time. And so it's just thinking out of the box a little is what needs to happen.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, just on its own about AI and, the noise around it for lack of a better term. But, you know, AI promises to be a disruptor, and there's a lot of questions about the implications of it. And in some ways, it's a big opportunity for any association, really, to be a conduit, right, for consensus and knowledge sharing. And if you're doing that consistently, then you're really training people that you're going to be facilitating those conversations that are important to people.
Yeah, it's an enabler. At the same time, we're going to be overridden with content that we won't be able to trust. And that means associations can leverage the fact that they are the highest trusted place for content. Not necessarily the highest quality content or the most content or the highest production value of content, but if they can tweak those, they can become the place where I'm just going to cut through the noise and I'm just going to go where it's safe to learn.
Dan, the report mentions that 71% of leaders cite capacity as the primary operational risk. And the biggest hesitation we hear is internal capacity, plus this fear of cannibalizing events. What's really happening there, and how do you navigate that?
Well, it's a real issue because, by nature, nonprofits aren't designing the revenue streams for continual reinvestment everywhere. And so as digital needs to grow, and my and that need to be able to serve 100% of my audience all year long, just that demand is there, I have to invest. Well, where am I going to get that money from? And so, you know, that's where leaning into sponsors and leaning into partnerships can help you create the funds and, in some cases, the content to fill that demand without it overwhelming your existing job. At the same time, people got to let go. Like what are you doing that is no longer valued by your members, right? So many associations are cutting back the frequency of their magazine right now, right? Or their journals. And so how can I, if I'm reducing that cost, how can I take that money I was spending and reinvest it in something that's modern? The old bell curve, right? I should be doing something at all spots on that bell curve. I should be trying some new innovative things while the old things like my events are still paying the bills before it's too late and my events no longer pay the bills.
One more question for you, Dan, and I think we're going to go to some questions from the audience here. The brief lays out 3 futures: adaptive associations that thrive, static ones that survive, and a fading middle that gets left behind. For leaders who feel cautious but know that they can't stand still, what's the first shift that they need to do to avoid being that middle?
Wow. I mean, one thing I love doing at least once a year is like a SWOT analysis. What are my strengths? What are my weaknesses, opportunities, and threats? And, you'd have to be kind of, on another planet, not to see the patterns and the trends that are happening, and this need to engage with value at a frequency higher than the annual conference. And so I would look at my strengths, which is my trust and my committees and this volunteer energy that I can get that an association has. And I would look at my partners and my sponsors and say, how can I use them in a structure that will not erode my trust? How do I set guardrails up to make sure they get what they need for spending money with us and partnering with us, but we're in control? And I would leverage those opportunities together to create those new opportunities, whether it be the AI example we talked about earlier, whatever that might be. And that's the beautiful thing about digital is you get analytics right away. You get to measure. So you start with a project, you get it funded, you know it's going to have some success, but you truly measure the success. Are people engaging with it? Get some quantitative and qualitative feedback. And that will be the impetus to say, you know what, let's pour gasoline on this and let's do more of it and let it grow and grow and grow. And it's not an and or an or. This is not at the expense of the annual conference. It's and, not or. So that's where I'd start.
Fantastic. Are you up for some questions from the audience?
Absolutely.
Okay, our first question here is, how does the shifting to digital affect our existing sponsor relationships? They are heavily involved in our events, and we don't want to put those relationships at risk.
And we hear this a lot, and it's I don't know one sponsor who would actually say that. It's just the mindset that we have that, we've tapped out all of the money they're willing to spend. Their event budgets are only a percentage of their entire marketing budget. And so it shouldn't be this and or. It should be, yes, this is what we're doing at the event, but do you not need business 12 months of the year? Yeah, you do. So why don't we help you between our newsletters and our programming and all of that all year long? And, and watch them open their wallets, right? We've seen associations that lean into this, bring in an extra $500,000, $600,000, $700,000 a year just by asking those questions and by co-creating content. Because why? Because they don't have the capacity to do it themselves as an association. They may not have the knowledge or the R&D budget that the sponsor has to lean into. And so all of a sudden, no, but what they do know is they know how to create content for members. And so together, 1+1 is 3 here, and you end up getting a whole bunch of new content for free, where you actually make some additional non-dues revenue.
Sign me up.
All
We
right.
got time for one more question here. What's the one thing I can do in the next month that would actually move us forward in creating digital revenue stream?
Well, I would look at those sponsors that are with you year after year, and don't assume that's going to happen. By the way, I was just on a call with an association who, I'm not saying they took them for granted, but they found other ways to spend their money, and it was a big hit to them. So you got to constantly make sure you're staying relevant, not just to members, but to also your sponsor community. And I would have those discussions and understand where their goals and your goals overlap, right? And if you can find those topics where you can co-create content that will be good for members, will make the sponsor look like an expert by being in the content or by participating or doing the R&D or whatever that may be. Now you've got a model where you can actually look down your exhibitor list or your sponsor list and go, what can they speak on as an expert where my members will care? And all of a sudden there's a content calendar that not only can be powerful, but can generate a lot of revenue without a lot of staff time. So it's kind of that triple win. That's where I would look first.
Fantastic. All right, Dan, we're pretty much set to wrap up here. What kind of takeaway do you want to leave for folks today, if they could remember just one thing?
I think everything comes down to experience, content, and revenue. That's what your magazines were. That's what your event is. But look at your digital environment. If your experience is weak, I can't find the content easily, or I have to go here to YouTube for videos or there to Spotify for podcasts or into a journal. Don't make it difficult. Have a cohesive experience with great content that is generating revenue, whether it's pay-per-view, whether it's sponsor supported. That is what works for all of your member values, not just digital. That's the approach that you need to take to digital. And when you do that, now you're growing a profit center, not a cost center, and it won't feel like you're doing it alone. You'll have all of these people helping you.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Dan, for making the time to appear on Association Amplified Live. And to everyone watching right now, thank you for being here, and we'll see you next time on Association Amplified Live.